with deep gratitude and joy, for your generosity of time and your sharing so much from your passions of helping others be who they are and to be at peace with who they are. So I welcome you both with aloha safely.
So thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to say I couldn't do this without my wing woman here, my co-presenter, Jessica. She is like the maven of computer, everything, not only personal, but also, oh my gosh, also the putting together of our program, our ITKA program. So I'm so grateful to Jessica. I was talking to a young person today who's 7 years old. And I have to say, Jessica happens to be a young man, 7 years old, born with a vagina. And because when you were talking about all the images on, the computer and on the, I call it cartoons, but that's not it. Wait a minute, Jessica, you have to tell me the name because I'm old school. That he said, it's okay. I see it on TV. I see it. And so, wow, I'm thinking a 7-year-old gets the benefit of the shoulders we stand on. So wait until you see Jessica's timeline because we stand on so many shoulders. I'm so grateful.
Wow. So yeah, today we're going to be presenting here what I call transgender care ethics in the 21st century. So this here that we're going to present to you today is kind of a summation of what we've talked about over the last 4 sessions that we've been online with you, which this presentation incidentally is the presentation that we typically use on the last day of our 52-hour course with our transgender certification therapists. So we do encourage you, if you're interested in taking our program, go to transgendercertification.com. And much of what you have seen us present to you over the last 4 years, you will see us present to you in a 52-hour format. And throughout our presentations, we also have lots of panelists who join us, such as you met on week 2, Tommy, and Mama Solomon, who we affectionately call Mama Solomon Jennifer. And we have people like this that come and help us out. So let's just go ahead and get right into it right now. So, we say transgender care, but we talked about in the first week when we were saying about terminology that transgender is only but one of the umbrella terms that we use. And now we use more of a gender expansive umbrella when we're talking about things that are gender variant or not quite the same. So let's get into a little cultural competency here under the gender variant umbrella. So who is this person? So when we look at this person right here, we see a young individual who is wearing a dress, wearing little shoes there and long hair. Now, if we were to judge this person with gender cues and gender props, we might think that this is a little girl. Does anybody know who this person happens to be? And you could just speak up if you happen to know. And I'll give you a hint. This is one of the most influential and important presidents of the United States history. So now that I say it's a president, you know that it's not a woman because we haven't had a woman yet. But we have this young person here, was the one who was 4 terms, and the only president in our history to get there to 4 terms. Didn't quite serve out his 4th, but this is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So FDR was born in the 19th century, and this was typical dress for young children of the time. The boys usually kept their hair long, and some of the boys who are of Jewish faith don't cut their hair until they are old enough that they have a ceremony called the Upshrin. And it's a beautiful ceremony. I've been a part of them before. And that's where they ceremoniously cut the boy's hair into boyhood. And so here we see a gown. Now, incidentally, gowns is what most children would wear back in those days in the 19th and 20th century. One of the reasons is we didn't have diapers back then. And so it was easier access for soiled pants to be changed if they were in a gown. So there was a practicality behind how children dressed, and of course the ruffles and such. If we saw this person right here, we might ask this person, if I asked you, well, how would you address them? Excuse me, sir, excuse me, ma'am. Many of us, again, looking at gender props and gender cues, may assume what pronouns we might want to use. We may say, oh, excuse me, sir, but maybe this person doesn't identify with the pronoun sir. Maybe this person prefers to use they or them. Maybe this person likes to use she pronouns. And some people might say, well, instead of saying, excuse me, sir, excuse me, ma'am, I'll just say, excuse me. But here's the problem with excuse me, because I promise you that during your conversation at some point, whatever preconceived notion you have of this person's gender, those pronouns are going to blow out of your mouth like you're vomiting them out to them at some point. And then it becomes embarrassing, not just for you, but for that person as well. Now, we hear a call and response. If I say, hi, how are you? Most of us are going to respond, what? Fine, how are you? Even if our lives are in the worst shape in that moment, it's just a call and response. We just automatically say, fine, how are you? Now, most kids these days introduce themselves. Hi, I'm Jessica, and I use she pronouns. What pronouns can I use for you? So who's to say that that call and response can't change? And so we see this person here, what looks like a very handsome young man. But what we know about this person is this person used to be this person. As a woman, has transitioned to become a man. This was an Olympian as well. So these are all just, different shades of what we see around gender in our world, based on props, based on cues. So who am I? These are 4 components that we talked about already with you. And so there's a really fun video that I usually show you here. What's the difference between boys and girls? But for the sake of time, we'll skip through that. Take our training. You'll see the video. You'll love it. So who am I? So who am I is number 1, that gender marker at birth, which is assigned to you. And how is it assigned to you? Well, based on what the doctor sees in between your legs. Now we have little machines that we put over a mommy's belly, and we get to see what that baby looks like under there. And we can make the assumption if it's a boy or girl. How do we know this? Because we're looking for body parts. And so if we see something that looks like a penis, oh, it's a boy. And if there's not something there, oh, it's a girl. Then immediately we decide blue and pink, and to decorate their rooms, blue for boys, pink for girls. But as we've learned in previous weeks, these colors came from a very pagan place. Colors were not traditionally defined as pink as girls and blue for boys. It was actually the opposite many, many years ago. So am I a boy or a girl? Well, the doctor decides that when you're born. Gender expression, this is how we adorn ourselves. So this is when we start to look at gender props and gender cues. I am masculine or I'm feminine. So this is the same person. And notice the difference between what this person looks like in male presentation or masculine presentation, or in female presentation or feminine presentation. Same face structure, almost the same hairstyle, except there looks like there's a little ponytail that was attached to the back there. Even, they're clean shaven, the makeup. So it's interesting, but this person may be comfortable wearing, male and feminine clothing. It just depends how they feel like on the day. And when we talk about one of our other umbrellas, which is gender queer has a lot to do with this gender expression. Now, somebody who identifies as genderqueer may not end up seeing a therapist to undergo any changes, because for them, it's more about their presentation and how they present. Marilyn, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I was talking to somebody this week who said, I'm fine if people want the surgery, but I just want to be me. And the being me is deciding how I want to present, which for some people can be confusing because we like to think in this, are you this or are you this? All right. But they said, and they identify with they said, oh, well, it depends. It depends on how I feel and where I'm going on that day. So thank you. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's so interesting that we want to think inside boxes. We have boxes to check off where we are. And what's really interesting about these boxes is that, once we labeled it, we want to think outside of the box. But the issue is when we think outside of the box, we create a whole new set of boxes to belong to. Why? Because we as humans, as people on this earth, want to belong to something greater. And so we want to label something as this is my group, this is my people. And these are where the boxes come from. Here's another one of the boxes, gender identity. So this is I am a boy or I am a girl. So this really goes down to the core of who you identify as far as gender. Has nothing to do with your reproductive organs, because those can be different. but this is what you say about yourself internally about your gender identity, different from gender expression. Go ahead, Marilyn.
By the way, I just was talking again to someone who was not born with a vagina. And it's rare, but it happens. And the most important part, thank you for saying the gender identity. When I asked what name she wants, how she wants, she was very clear. I'm a girl. I'm a girl. So even if the private parts are not there, what's the gender identity between the ears and the heart? So thank you. Thank you so much.
And then there is sexual attraction. Who am I attracted to? And this is different from all three of those things, the intersection of which is what creates nonconformity. But just because you were born with a penis and designated male at birth, and because you may identify later in life and feel more comfortable in feminine clothing, and you may even identify your gender identity as that is female, but you could be attracted to other women. That doesn't mean you're a homosexual man because there was an M on your birth certificate. This might mean that this person might identify as a lesbian. So if you look at those four different pieces and how they can all be different in some cases. So, any questions so far? Here is how it really looks like when we really get down to it. So you can see, and this can change from the beginning there, from conception to birth through puberty. A lot of these things can change, but it can get really fun and complicated, just as you see in that picture. That's the tip of the iceberg, folks. So the societal norms are the concepts are based that one can either be he or she, or maybe both, or neither, or either. So, what is transgender? So, going deeper into these waters, we'll talk about the transgender umbrella, or rather, the gender nonconforming umbrella. It's the general term that we use to apply to a variety of individuals and behaviors and groups which involve the tendencies and behavior that differ from binary identities. This can be of someone of any sexual orientation. So, let's go and see the history of this through time. Now, I use the term here transgenderism isn't really the most politically correct to say. Most trans individuals do not like to see the word ism because they see it as something that's very derogatory. But for the sake of our presentation, we'll do that here. So there's a video there that is about by intersexuality, or this is the rare condition in which an individual has discrepancy between their sex chromosomes, XY or XX. So possessing genetic and phenotypic characteristics typical of both men and women in variable degrees, not disease. Sorry, that was just a Freudian slip. So, but intersex is essentially someone who may have both parts, and this is a genetic trait. So it's not so much about the expression of this person or even the gender identity. It really has to do with the biology of this person. And these individuals, in most cases, now there was a time in Miami where there was a thing called the rule of thumb. The doctor used if the penis was smaller than the tip of the thumb, they would perform surgery on this child to create a neovagina because they thought that that was a genetic defect. These children later grew up in life to say, "Why did you mutilate me? This is not who I am." And so, in many cases, those who identify as intersex will say, "Wait until we're old enough to." I mean, the only time you're going to make a decision like this is if their life is in the balance, and then it's a matter of life or death, and you have to make that decision. Go ahead, Marilyn.
Or they can't urinate properly, or you need something to help with that. And every once in a while that happens. So I'm really grateful. So let's see. I'm interested in history.
So
Oh,
let's take a look at history. So now going back to 1479 BC, I say BC before Caitlin. No, just kidding. So this is before. So Pharaoh Hetshepsut ruled as a man for 2 decades, despite being biologically female, even wore a false beard. Okay, so we're seeing now someone of a leader that identified as what would be a trans man today. 801 to 701 BC. The Makhunatan, effeminate men in early Islamic and Arabian society who resembled women, once worshipped and seen as matchmakers, were later met with disapproval by Muslims. So these individuals back in that culture were celebrated and worshipped and seen as the most important people of their people, of their race. And so religion came and changed this much later. on. 900 to 800 BC. How many of us recognize that little character right there? We have a holiday coming up in a few days or next week. And this character is very predominantly featured through that holiday. This is young Cupid. And Cupid is what we would call, now, does anybody know if Cupid is a boy or a girl? You can make your assumptions, but if you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. But Cupid has no genitalia. They're not, you never really see the why, because Cupid is the offspring of Hermes and Aphrodite, the Greek god and goddess. And if you mix Hermes and Aphrodite together, what do you get? The term that we used to use before intersex, which is hermaphrodite. And this was the earliest form of a hermaphrodite that we celebrate for Valentine's. So there actually is a holiday in the year that we celebrate the gender nonconforming community. Isn't that great? So there we have the dual god or goddess of love, originally portrayed as intersex, the child of Hermes and Aphrodite. In Greek mythology, there is Tiresias, a blind prophet of Apollo and Thebes, famous for clairvoyance and for being transformed into a woman for 6 years. So imagine that. So this was a story that was told about this individual that lived as a woman for quite some time. And wow, the tales that they could tell. And those of you who love the Avengers, we might recognize this figure over here, but he's wearing a dress. That's Thor, the great Norse mythology god who at one point was dressed and was going to be married in mythology. So 668 BC, there's King Asburnabal of Assyria, spent a great deal of time in women's clothing. This was later used as a justification to overthrow him. So we can see even back in 668 BC, this was seen as quite negative by some, but here's the one that really fascinates me the most. 203 BC, this I always get his name wrong, so Elagabalus, yes, was a Roman emperor, and he reported to have offered half of the Roman Empire to the surgeon who could equip him with female genitalia, 203 BC. So even then, we were looking to see if there was a medical way to transform our gender from one to another. So this goes all the way back there, 150 to 100 BC. Of course, many societies prohibited women from performing on stage, so boys and men took the female roles. In the ancient Greek theater, men played the females. So here is a little bust here of a person who would portray a female in theater back in those times. So 6 to 1 BC. Now here's an important text. Sometime between the 6th century and 1st century BC, the Greek Hippocratic Corpus. This was a collection of medical texts. So this was what doctors and physicians would go consult when they were looking to diagnose. And so physicians proposed that both parents secrete what was called male or female bodies. And that if the father's secretion was more female rather than male, and the mother's was more male, the result would be what would be considered a man-woman, or an effeminate male, or even a mannish female. So look at this, that the medical texts are trying to justify and figure out, what this means when someone is gender nonconforming. The Middle Ages, life in society in the late Middle Ages was heavily dominated by the teachings of the church concerning cross-dressing. Now, if we were to grab the Bible today and see, okay, where does it say here that being a transgender person is wrong? Well, Deuteronomy 22:5 states, woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, and it made cross-dressing an anathema. Now, it's important also to realize why that was written in scripture, because during that time, women were adorning themselves in male clothing to serve in the clergy. And women were not allowed to serve in the clergy. So if they felt called by God, they would do this. And this is where this whole passage really comes from. So you can go into a religious theology class and really investigate that a little further. Now let's look at 1429 AD. Joan of Arc burned at the stake at the age of 19. Many think she was burned for heresy or witchcraft. That's how the story goes. But the only crime that the Inquisition tribunal could formally charge her was wearing men's clothing. So imagine that. Now, going back hundreds and thousands of years, we have the two-spirit individuals. They were called the British, but that's not a term that they like to use because British means slave boy. And so not necessarily a nice word to use, but two-spirit These are individuals that were celebrated by their tribes as individuals who experienced life in two genders. And how special is that? You must have some unique insight if you can both see into the mind of a man and a woman. However, when the Europeans look at how religion comes in and then sees this as a blasphemy, Europeans came and saw these two spirits. They reacted with shock and amazement, and sometimes with violence. And in 1513, there was a conquistador, Vasco Nunez de Balboa, who had encountered these two spirits in Panama and put them to death by his dogs. He made it his personal mission to eliminate these individuals off the face of this earth in the name of God. 1577, King Henry III, a real fashionista of his time. Go ahead, Marilyn.
I just want to say, because my father was a minister and I am very comfortable in religious and non-religious groups. And when I began to present this wonderful history, and I said, well, Daddy, you know, people, you say God loves all people and there's no mistakes. And the only thing, because he never took a sexuality class and we didn't have this, and we're going to go into 1577, he just said, I guess we're supposed to learn lessons. And I just remembered that as like, yes, and thank you for teaching us lessons, and thank you, Daddy, Dancing with Angels. So go into 1577.
Absolutely. Well, here's 1577. RuPaul wasn't the first one to get in drag and be a famous fashionista. This was the RuPaul of his time, and he referred to himself as an omnisexual, given to wild orgies while dressed in drag. So imagine the parties that this person used to throw. So 1632, Queen Christina of Sweden was known to cross gender boundaries and fascinated people with her unconventional ways. So people were just, wow, you're such an interesting person. I like you. You're very interesting. So 1585 to 1613, of course, those of us who love Shakespeare, he would regularly use female characters to dress as men in order to afford the female character more freedom in a restrictive society for women. So the female character dressed as a man could move more freely, speak more freely, and use their wit and intelligence to overcome problems. So, you know, we see this also portrayed on the stage. Now, moving a little further in time, so we are looking here at men's fashion of the 1700s and the 1800s. So very interesting to see how they're dressed. So they're in high heels, they're wearing stockings, they're wearing very roughly looking shirts, and it's powdered wigs, and so if we saw a person dressed like that today, we'd probably say that person was a drag queen or something along that lines. So, but this was very normal dress for men of that time. The 1800s, this is where queen was used as a term as a derogatory slur towards homosexual. Cross-dressing and drag queen shows were popular since the 19th century. And here is a wonderful picture of cross-dressers of that time. So in the 19th century. And I think it's fascinating to look at the colors they're wearing. Notice that they're not wearing pink, that they're not wearing vibrant colors, because this is what women used to wear, very dark, traditional brown, grays, blues type dark colors. Because why? They were not allowed to flaunt themselves, up there. So 1728, here's the famous French spy Chevalier d'Eon was born male but lived much of his life as a woman. 1861, during the Civil War, here's Franklin Thompson, who was actually Sarah Emma Edmonds, who was a woman who fought in the Civil War under a man's name because she felt, or he, we don't know the pronouns because I haven't met this person, but this pronoun may have been using he pronouns, of course, as Franklin. And so this person felt very strong to be part of this war to their belief systems, and this is one of the reasons probably why they did this. 1886, Wewa, a two-spirit Zuni woman, spent 6 months in Washington, D.C., and guess what? Nobody even considered that she might have been born with the male designation at birth.
I just want to say, I just want to say, when you were talking about serving in the war, this is way before efforts of our former and now present administration. There were people who fought in war efforts and they presented in different ways. So it's something to really, shoulders we stand on. Go.
Absolutely. And here's 1878, born in Mexico. This is Mrs. Nash was assigned male at birth, worked as a laundress for the 7th Cavalry in Montana, during which time she married 3 different enlisted men. And when Nash died of appendicitis in 1878, the woman preparing her body for burial discovered what her assigned sex actually was. So nobody knew that this woman here had male genitalia. So they just assumed, and she was married. So I wonder what that relationship might have been like with her husbands. Might not have been a sexual
Yeah,
relationship.
how did she get away with it with the men unless they were totally accepting of her as a male?
That's a possibility. So they might have been accepting of this, or sometimes you married for convenience, and not because you wanted to have sex with this partner. So it may not have been maybe there was never a time that the man would discover what was there, and maybe that there was limits. She would like, okay, you can do all this and you can do that, but you can't do that. So there's different ways that she might have concealed, or it's possible that the husbands were okay with it. Go ahead, Marilyn.
Wouldn't we have loved to take sex histories in those days? Oh, that would be
Oh
nice.
yeah. And here we go. In the late 19th century, Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld, this is a very important man to the transgender community because he was really the one that pathologized this and really studied this, and much of modern science today and how we refer to transgenderism, if you will, or what it is due to the research that this person started back in that time. He was the one that coined the term transvestite and was also known to cross-dress himself, not because he himself was a transvestite, but because he wanted to put himself in the mindset of these individuals and the power that you put clothing. I encourage you, go home tonight and put on an article of clothing that you may not be comfortable with. So women, go put on some male clothing, a nice suit, and don't wear makeup tonight and tell me how you feel. Or if you're a boy, put on a dress or a bra and tell me how you feel. You might feel that the dress is very freeing, but you're not comfortable with that bra on your chest. So, it's interesting because when you put yourself in the shoes of the other person, you get to experience it. Now, that's just a moment of your life. Imagine if it was for your entire life that you were feeling this way. And this is the experience of the person who identifies as gender nonconforming. So there's our term transvestites. It's a term used for an individual who dresses in clothes of the opposite sex that may adopt behaviors or practices of the opposite gender to pass, but generally don't want to change their bodies. The majority identify as heterosexual and are comfortable with their assigned gender at birth. Now, the term transvestite is not one that we use anymore. This is one that is very seldom used, and what we now refer to as a cross-dresser. Now, in some cases, somebody who might identify as genderqueer may also be considered a cross-dresser, or if for all intensive purposes might have been somebody back in 1970 that the therapist might diagnose as a transvestite. So the terminologies, they do change throughout time. So here we have in the early 1900s, so coming into the 20th century, despite a seeming absence from the historical record, people who did not conform to traditional gender norms were a part of the daily life in the Old West. I would love to see a movie out there of trans people in the Old West. I think that would be so much fun. We've seen some movies where women, are gunslinging, but let's take it a little deeper, right? Here's one person. Here's a group of women. Now, do you think that any man would approach them? Now, we by today's standards may look at this and say, "Oh, they do look like women, dress like men." But during that time, you would not question that these were men. So that's how it was. Fighter, bootlegger, and bad man is Miss Pickrell, for love of whom 3 women have killed themselves. So here is a person who wears men's clothing and is equally at home in a saloon brawl or a fist fight. She's never failed to hold her own. Now, notice all the pronouns are she, but he was a trans man of his time and apparently broke a couple hearts. And so this is why it made the news. So, and here we have another person. This is a transgender person of the time as well. So as you start to see now, 1917, here is, now when we talk about operations, now recorded a history here, because I'm sure there were operations that happened hundreds of thousands of years ago, people trying to, as we saw in the Roman Empire. But here's one in our medical textbooks. Alan Hart, American physician, radiologist, also novelist, won a Nobel Peace Prize. Was one of the first American female to male transsexuals to undergo hysterectomy and a gondectomy in the United States. Lived the rest of his life as a man. No one ever questioned this about this individual. So trans men were really the ones that were most visible in the 20th century. Go ahead, Marilyn.
And somebody has to be the person who's going to test it out, somebody, before it works. Just like people are questioning vaccines now, I understand it's not a political, you should or shouldn't, but somebody has to be the one testing it out, just like anything about diabetes or anything about your eyes or anything. And in this particular case, to have a successful for him. And what year was that,
Oh,
Jessica?
that was back in 1914. So
Please,
imagine that.
so someone had to be, I call it, they call it guinea pigs. They, no offense about anybody who loves guinea pigs out there, because one of our nephews does. Okay, but somebody has to be the guinea pigs to really try it out, a human being. So yes, so here we are, 1920s.
So a trans man didn't really make the news back then. What used to make the news were men who became women. And in 1921, we have the first reported surgery for Dora R. of Germany under the care of Magnus Hirschfeld. Look at that name, see, important name. Began surgical transition from 1921, ending in 1930, with a successful genital reassignment surgery. Now, this is the term transsexual. So these were the two terms, transvestite, transsexual, and we used that all the way towards the end of the 20th century. We didn't start to change that terminology until the 1990s and late 1990s, and really into the 21st centuries when we started to come up with other terms. But transsexual is that identity in which the individual identifies and wants to live and be accepted as a member of the sex opposite to their biological gender. They desire to align their gender expression with their internal gender identity and may cause the individual to seek surgeries. Now, not all transsexual people will want to have surgeries. Most are just looking to live their life in the gender presentation that they themselves feel comfortable in. So what's between their legs doesn't matter. So 1930, there's LB. Now there was a great movie that was made a couple, maybe 5-10 years ago, The Danish Girl. It's about this person right here. LB was an experimental state at this time, series of 5 operations carried out over a period of 2 years. This is the actual person here from The Danish Girl, so we can see here. Now, what's really fascinating about this person's story is that they were married, they had a partner, and that partner supported them through the transition. The movie does a great job of really portraying that relationship and how it was. Now, of course, the movie was sensationalized and they took liberties just, to make it dramatic. It is Hollywood, so things change in Hollywood. But the first surgery, removal of the testicles, the orchiectomy, was made under the supervision, there's that name again, Magnus Hirschfeld. The rest of LB surgeries were carried out by Dr. Kurt Wankernos in the Dresden Municipal Women's Clinic. So the second operation was to remove the penis. Look at this, transplant ovaries, which were taken from a 26-year-old woman. These were soon removed in a third, then fourth operation due to rejection and other serious complications. Why were they doing this? So the fifth operation was to transplant a uterus and was intended to allow LB, about 50 at the time, to become a mother. She soon after died of a transplant rejection. So you can see in 1930, we're what, 1920, we're in 2021, almost 100 years ago now, that we were trying to have people who had penises at birth to be able to have children. Now, we do have today a transgender people who have children. Most of them are trans men who haven't removed uterus. And sometimes they don't do that because they want a desire to have their own biological children. So go ahead, Marilyn.
And now, of course, they're looking at, and a uterine transplant for cisgender women, and of course for trans women. So it's going to be interesting. My 5th graders that I teach go, why not? If you got lung transplant, heart transplant, kidney transplant, why not? So you can
No,
see.
and now we're talking about DNA manipulation. And so by doing that, you can just literally change a person. I mean, it's fascinating just to see how far medical is going with some of these things. And then there's the question, should we play God, in these instances? Now, I always say, let's question this. What if we lived in a perfect world that said, you're beautiful just the way you are, and I have no issues with what gender you are? I mean, would we actually desire all these surgeries that we would want? I would fathom to think that it might not be as important at that time, because most of the time what we're looking for is a place to belong and a sense of feeling good about ourselves. So now we talk about 1945, Lucy Hicks Anderson. This is one of the earliest documented cases of an African-American transgender person. And how important was she? She was considered as one of the earliest pioneers for marriage equality. I wish I could sit here and watch this video with you. It's a very fascinating video about her. I encourage you to look her up. That is Lucy Hicks Anderson. So please look her up and see what is so important about this lady here.
Especially as we are now in African American History Month. So please.
Yes. So Lucy Anderson Hicks, look her up and find out why she's so important, not just to the transgender community, but for marriage equality.
Yes.
Okay. So 1946, Lauren Michael Dillon was the first transgender man to undergo a phalloplasty. So now in 1946, we are actually trying to create a penis. And this was performed by Dr. Harold Gillies. Now, Michael also published a book entitled Self Study in Endocrinology and Ethics, which some consider the very first book that was written by a trans person about transitioning. So he described transgender identification as innate and unaffected by psychotherapy, and advocated medical treatment using hormones and surgery as an alternative. So very interesting. Now, Harry Benjamin, German-born American endocrinologist and sexologist, widely known for his clinical work with transsexualism, okay? He would develop what we would call the transition timeline. This has evolved now to the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, WPATH, but this was early on the transition period. So if you were looking to transition in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s, you would have to follow a timeline like this, which meant there was a personal evaluation made by a therapist. Then there was a preparation for transition. Notice that there is a place where the employer is notified that you're transitioning, and then the employee's first day at work and new gender presentation, which becomes the real life experience. And the real life experience can sometimes take between 2 to 3 years before they could have what would be considered post-transition, which is the surgery. So during that real life experience is when they would be taking hormones and living their life in the preferred gender that they are. Now, this has changed now through WPATH as we have discovered that, 3 years is a long time. So, and for a long time, trans people were considering a therapist as what we would call gatekeepers, because if they wouldn't let me change who I am, I couldn't do that. So, they felt very suppressed. Now, WPATH changed it, and now it's based on a very a personalized experience with the individual. Go ahead, Marilyn, you can interject here.
Also, in those days, it was like 2 or 3 professional people had to evaluate. And we're also looking not just about that, but what are other issues in the person's life? How are they coping? So counseling is important. However, it was like, oh my gosh, if I can have my breasts redone, or if I can have a uterus taken out, if I want, why can't I? So this is a very interesting question. And now it's a lot, I'm going to say, while it's important that people go see a counselor, not everybody can take hormones and not everybody wants surgery. And so the WPATH guidelines, thank you for bringing that up. That's what we use now.
All right, so let's move into a little bit more modern times. So this is now within the last 40 years, 40 to 50 years. So 1952, oh, here we go. There's the transvestite as a social problem, transsexual as a gender problem. So here we go, 1952, Christine comes home. Now,
Christine Jorgensen, who used to answer to George, creates quite a stir as she returns home to New York from Copenhagen. Christine hit the headlines following the series of operations in Denmark that transformed her from a boy into a girl.
Very impressed by everyone coming.
Christine, are you happy to be home?
Yes, of course. What American wouldn't be?
Have you been offered a movie contract?
Yes, but I haven't accepted it.
Do you have any plans regarding the theater?
No, I don't think so.
Are you going to go on with your photography?
I hope so, yes.
I see. Right.
I'm very happy to be back, and I don't have any plans at the moment. And I thank you all for coming, but I think it's too much.
It was a little much for Christine at that time, but this made headlines. Now, that was what was called the news serial. And a news serial used to play before a movie. You would go to the movie theaters to watch a movie, and before the movie, you'd watch news from around the world. So imagine sitting there with your family before a movie, watching this news serial come up and go, wow. Now imagine if you're one of those people sitting in that audience who might identify like Christine and say, there's somebody else out there who feels the same as I do. So Christine Jorgensen was, for lack of a better analogy, the Caitlyn Jenner of her time. So, because we'll get into Caitlyn in a second here too, but not the first person to medically transition, but her fame really put it out there for the first time for people to see that publicly. 1964, here's a trans man, Reed Erickson, creates a foundation, donates millions of dollars to promote transgender equality. And then here's the birth of the modern LGBTQ movement. This is the Stonewall Riots in 1969. It all started with a pair of drag queens. So trans women, including Sylvia Rivera and Marsha Johnson. These are very important people to our gay rights movement today. But this was where this all began. 1977, New York Supreme Court rules in favor of Renee Richards. Renee Richards was a trans woman who won her case against the U.S. Tennis Association, gaining the right to play professional tennis as a woman. So let's watch this little video here about how transgender has been portrayed in the media.
There was only 3 networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS. And I don't remember any television show characters that I could identify with entirely. Certainly no characters being trans. Those types of characters were not even around.
There's definitely nothing on TV. There's nothing that I'm going to find in the movies to relate to. And so you get this attitude like, you know, that it's you're alone and it's you against the rest of the world.
Come along, Mildred dear.
I remember Hilton Burrow doing drag. It was really kind of ridiculous.
At the beginning, when it was straight guys doing it, it was burlesque. They were making fun of women.
John! John! Well, so this is what George does behind my back.
Look, Ray.
Oh, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. You barefoot huzzy, you.
For a lot of that stuff, the humor of it eluded me completely.
So you can see how it was portrayed on TV. I remember at a young age seeing a episode of The Jeffersons where one of George's buddies from the military came back and thought he was playing a practical joke, but in all actuality, this person had transitioned into a woman. And so it was a very fascinating. Now, it was played by a woman playing a trans woman. Goodness, the only time you would see a trans person on TV would be like on a show like Bosom Buddies, where it's clearly men making hilarious gestures, like you saw Milton Berle there dressed up in drag. But it was always like you know, part of a joke. You know, we were the end of a joke somehow. And so for trans people, it was very difficult. Now, one of the movies that really made an impact for our community was this one here in 1993 about transgender youth Brandon Tina, who was violently murdered in Nebraska. The film Boys Don't Cry later shares Brandon's story with the national audience. And this is really where we start to see some of the tragedies of our trans community. 1991, Paris is Burning was released. This is a documentary focusing on the gay and transgender ball culture in New York City. And for those of you who have Netflix, I encourage you to watch the TV show Pose. This is about that time period right there, and you get to see how that was often portrayed. So that's where we have drag performers. This is an individual who dresses or acts like the opposite sex for entertainment purposes. So here's another term that we use. One of the most famous drag performances, RuPaul. We've mentioned RuPaul before.
Hi, Nelson. Hey. Oh, honey. If anybody can make a fool out of themselves, it is me. I gotta use this bathroom. Who's in here? Trying to make this damn money. Goddamn bathroom money. All right. I done made my money, honey. I do not. I need some lipstick. I look absolutely terrible. Do I have my shoes? I got my shoes. I don't have any lipstick on, Nelson. My hair is a mess. I've let these men touch all over me for the money. I'm trying to pay my rent. I'm trying to get a new apartment. And I let all these men touch me just because I wanted the money. Isn't that terrible?
It's terrible, but he's probably feeling really good about himself now. This is part of his journey in life. So, but this a lot of times, there was these trans individuals who would engage in these type of practices of dancing on poles and walking the streets because that was really the only place they could express themselves. And most of them couldn't hold a regular job, so the only way they could make money was by going into these dark places of society. 1999 was our first Transgender Day of Remembrance. This was a year after the murder of Rita Hester. And it's what we consider here in our transgender community our Veterans Day, if you will. So this is the day that we remember these transgender individuals who were violently murdered, who may have taken their own lives, but that are no longer with us. And so we honor their memory on this day on November 21st every year. And we call that the Transgender Day of Remembrance. So I encourage you on that day to look around your communities and see where there might be some individuals, or groups that are practicing this day, and be part of those ceremonies. So it's a wonderful thing to be part of. Now, 2002 to present day, because we need to flash forward now because we're getting to the end of our time. 2006, trans woman elected to the Hawaiian Board of Education, Kin Coco, in 2006. There you go, Hawaii. Shout out for you. 2007, trans woman stars in a primetime drama, Dirty Sexy Money, Candace Kane, girlfriend of Billy Baldwin's character. 2008, who remembers this? America's Next Top Model features a trans woman, Isis King. 2009, Chaz Bono announces transition. So at the age of 40, the child of singing icon Sonny and Cher announces he is a trans man. So this was a very important figure, as important as Caitlyn Jenner was for trans women. Chaz Bono was just as important for trans men because it really made it visible at that time. And Chaz Bono was on Dancing with the Stars and represented our community pretty well. 2010, this is when the beautiful Laverne Cox makes her first appearance as the very first African-American transgender woman to produce and star in her own TV show. This was before Orange is the New Black. 2010, Amanda Simpson becomes the first transgender presidential appointee. So moving forward, we have 2012, the Miss Universe pageant opens the competition to trans contestants. So after initially disqualifying Canadian contestant Jenna Talakakova because she is transgender, Miss Universe reverses the course and opens competition to all women, which was pretty interesting. 2012, here is Kyler Broadus, who is the founder of the Trans People of Color Coalition, first trans person to testify before Congress. And during our last presentation, I introduced you to some new officials in our politics that are transgender as well. So there we have it, the transgender tipping point. So it is considered now America's next civil rights frontier. And here's Caitlyn Jenner,
extraordinary moment in the
bringing
world
it
of
in.
sports tonight. Nearly 40 years ago, Bruce Jenner, all muscle and grit, burst into the national consciousness while capturing Olympic glory. And tonight, Caitlyn Jenner, draped in a glamorous white dress, having recently become perhaps the most famous face in the transgender community, received a major honor at the ESPYs.
Ladies and gentlemen, the courageous, the stunning Caitlyn Jenner.
A standing ovation tonight for an athlete who became an American hero at the Olympics and may now be changing America itself. Caitlyn Jenner kissing her mother and then walking to the stage at the ESPYs right here on ABC to accept the Arthur Ashe Courage Award.
It's been eye-opening, inspiring, but also frightening. All across this country right now, all across the world, at this very moment, there are young people coming to terms with being transgender.
With help from Angelina.
So this was an important moment in time. I do affectionately say AC and BC, after Caitlyn and before Caitlyn, but after Caitlyn, there was a slew of transgender individuals coming out of the closet saying, if Caitlyn can come out, so can I. But why was Caitlyn so important? Because Caitlyn introduced a term into households all over the world, and we now became familiar with the term transvestite. Well, we're not transvestite, transsexual, transgender. These are the terms that Caitlin uses to describe herself. She describes herself as a transsexual. Of course, because Caitlin comes from an older generation, not a little bit older than me, but these are the terms that I grew up with, and so of course Caitlin identifies with those things. But we start to see now the gender variance, and there's our umbrella. What we see is that transgender identities will self-identify. The umbrella term includes many overlapping categories. They're related because of the prevailing gender discordance between their biological cisgender. What does that mean? That, here and what's in between my legs matches. Transgender, the opposite. Okay, when referring to a transgender person, it's respectful to always use their preferred name and pronoun. So I'm going to show you this quick video because I love this video. Now imagine this was shown during the Super Bowl many, many years ago, but I thought this was great. So painting the picture that here we have, men watching the commercials, and the women are maybe back in the kitchen watching this on the TV as well. And so tell me what you think about this commercial here. Oops. What this person's wearing there is called a binder.
Gambari.
Right.
Red
passion. Now, who had a WTF moment there? So go ahead, Marilyn. Let's get your comments on that.
It's amazing because when you see from the history of this, the shoulders we stand on, and to where this amazing, and obviously they were advertising some kind of liqueur, I saw, but how they presented it was so amazing because in 1970s, when we didn't have all of this, I would go each year for 20 years up to Cape Cod to the Fantasia Fair to meet Virginia Prince and Dr. Ariadne Kane and so many other people whose shoulders we stand on, because now they're dancing with angels, and that part, and the first women who started the women's groups of women married to cross dressers in those days. So it was so interesting to see where the shoulders we stand on to get to not only all these words, but to also get to an advertising that doesn't have to say word one, doesn't have to say word one or a label, and you see it.
And we saw in week 2 so many kids and young people identifying as trans and non-binary infiltrating our movies and our TV screens. And so it's become very common now. Here's some additional terminology for, transition, which is the process of changing from one gender to another. Passing, this is to be seen or read as the gender that the individual is presenting as. Stealth refers to a person who passes as their desired gender at all times and who's broken contact with gender history. Now, a lot of trans kids may go stealth. So mommy and daddy will pull them out of one school, put them in a new school with their new gender. That way, for the safety of their children. So, there's reasons why people would do that. So, why do people transition? Why does somebody decide not to transition? Why are people transgender? So it could have a lot to do with cultures, biology, the right to choose, psychological factors, medical theories, lots of different things. But remember that not all transgender or gender nonconforming individuals are transsexual and may not be seeking medical treatment to change their sex. So there's some issues, problems with passing, the age at which they transition, access to medical care, genetics, etc. So there's many, many other challenges. Here's one. If you went to the store, maybe you find a happy birthday card, and next to the happy birthday card, there's a "Sorry, I laughed at your penis" card, right?
Right. I just want to say the word passing can get confusing because in fact, I was talking to a young person today that said, oh my gosh, I really passed person born with a penis and presenting female. And the passing meant they didn't read me as male. which would be different for somebody, let's say, who happened to be gay or lesbian that wasn't ready to come out. So they want to pass to be heterosexual. So this is a word that's very interesting depending on what you're dealing with.
Here are some of the obstacles that they'd have to overcome when changing their gender identity: paperwork and documentation, policies and procedures at work, state and federal laws. We talked about that during week 3. Physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual challenges, relationships, finances, social status, medical complication, lots of different things. So, the prevalence of this isn't very accurate to estimate because many don't want to stand up and be counted. So the statistical information, when you look at it, it's always much, much higher than what we're reporting. So no one is collecting this data, really. The census doesn't track it, and many trans individuals are not public about their identities. So it's interesting that I actually worked for the Census Bureau for a short time this past year, and I was trained when I had to ask your gender, but whatever you told me your gender was, regardless of what my perceived idea of your gender was, I had to go by what you said. So if a trans person said to me, I'm a woman or I'm a man, I would have to put that regardless of what that presentation said, which I thought was a plus in the right direction. But it would be interesting to really capture how many. They say it's 1% of our population. I would say that it's a little higher than that. It's important to note that 90%, 9 out of every transgender people report harassment and discrimination and mistreatment. 50% of transsexual teens will attempt suicide before the age of 20. That has not changed. It's about 42, but it's still close to 50. 1 out of every 2 kids will try to take their own life. 31% will commit suicide. This is 9% above the average, the highest suicide. So this is why, we have to do that. And the media, it has changed, and we see how it has changed over time. I wish I can get into all these clips with you in early film and all this. So in 2012, and so, how it's really interesting just to see, there's just so much. But before we wrap everything up, I want to talk a little bit about etiquette. So number 1, respect their confidentiality. Don't make assumptions. Don't ask about surgical status. You're not going to ask a woman with a nice, a beautiful face, where did you get your nose job? Or what's the name of the surgeon that gave you your boob job? These are not questions we would ask a regular person. You don't ask a trans person, oh, when did you have surgery? Did you have that surgery in the middle? So that's very important. Respect their pronouns. They'll let you know their pronouns. Just ask them. Don't tolerate anti-trans remarks. If you just let it happen, you're part of the problem. So if you hear somebody saying something negative, I would encourage you, as a cisgender person of privilege, you have the power to stand up and say that is wrong. You have that power to say that. Be patient and supportive. Watch your language, know your limits. And what you're doing right now, which I want to thank each and every one of you, is you're educating yourself. So, we talk about where would you fit in, sexual designation at birth. Are you both? Gender expression, sexual orientation. Are you female? Are you male? Are you neither? Are you, attracted to, they only taught me to think outside of the box. I'm not trained for circles. So anyhow, let's go ahead and wrap it up. And thank you so much for having us be here. Here's another shameless plug for the Transgender Certification Association. This is just a taste of what we educate, guys. There's so much more we can tell you about, but I really appreciate you sitting here, taking the time and trying to learn. And these past 3 weeks, there was a lot of information we imparted with you. I hope you take that and pass it on and move into the next generation, a better life for individuals who identify as gender expansive. So take it away, Marilyn.
And to Gillian and Nico and all of the people, thank you. And thank you very much. Anybody who wants to take the training, you will see much, much more and hear from so many more people. But I'm grateful to all of you. And I have to thank, the co-presenter. I can't tell you how much Jessica personally and professionally has helped so much. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a
appreciate you
question.
being here with you guys. So yeah, if you have questions, ask. So we'll give you
Do
another.
you have enough time for a question?
Sure.
Go for it.
So with all this, we always heard the term, it's the norm. You know, it's the norm to be this, it's the norm to live here, it's the norm to dress this. Where and can we even use that term anymore for what is the norm? What is the guideline that people always need some kind of like yardstick to go by? How does that term fit anymore?
Well, I'll tell you my definition of normal. So for me, for years, I've redefined normal because really what's normal is that we're all different and unique in our own special ways. Because let me tell you this much, if I were to take you and clone you and create another you, does that mean I have a duplicate of you? No, it means that we have something that might look like you, but it's not you. It's somebody completely different. Look at twins. You know, twins are not identical because they're two unique individuals there. That goes to show you and say that you are unique and special. That means that nobody in the history of all time will ever exist that's going to be like you. And how amazing is that? So what's normal is that we're different and we can celebrate those differences.
The range of, I always say too, and that's wonderful how Jessica really says it to the point, is that there's a range of what is normal, a range, and that difference of range that is so interesting. And once you begin to be open to see the range of who the person is, oh my gosh, you'll learn. And also that person will feel honored and their self-esteem and your own self-esteem will grow because they're trusting you. They're trusting you to say who they really are. And I have been in gratitude that not only Jessica, but the transgender community has allowed me in and taught me. And so it is an honor, hugely, hugely.
Our next generation is creating an entirely new dialogue and definition of what this is supposed to mean, not just based on gender, but also based on race. We're seeing just this evolution happening right now, today, with our next generation of youth. And these things are being redefined. So come back in another 20 years and I'll have a different training to give you. So.
And new words, and new words.
So I would like to read one. Let me see if I could get on here in full screen. Why am I having trouble with full screen now? But anyway, I don't know, I can't get back to full screen for some reason. So let me leave it. Oh, there it is, view. I'd like to see everybody. There we go. So this one, I don't know, took me way, way, way beyond. It was fantastic. And whoever's listening to this video, either now or when we post it, it will be posted on a Global Voice of Peace website, the Insight Piece, INCITE Peace. And I think Nico has it's on the chat, because that's where all these sessions are posted with videos from each session. And we welcome comments, but most important to really watch the video to get an understanding of what this is really all about, because this is now, and as you see, this has been forever. This is not, we didn't, determine this now. And that timeline blew me away. I mean, how much further back do we have to go to say, this has been the norm all along. We just, society changes it. So please go there. Please contact Marilyn and Jessica if you know someone that needs a gentle guiding heart and hand through this process, no matter how old, no matter whether it's your child, your parent, whatever. If you see someone struggling, that's the time to get them to these two ladies, because we don't want to see unnecessary death and suicide. Tommy was an alcoholic because he couldn't share. And then once he decided he wanted to live and not die from alcoholism, he came out. So why put people, no matter who you are, through that, when there are people like you that can lend them the support. So please, if anyone is watching and listening, contact Jessica, contact Marilyn, they will take you through whatever it is you're going through, and tell everyone else you know. So again, tears of gratitude and sharing and the learning. Really very touching. So I appreciate you all, and thank you for joining in, those who have, and we will see you again. I know we will. And Marilyn, I'll be in Florida one of these days when they lift all the restrictions.
Absolutely.
And
You'll come.
Jessica, we're gonna have lunch together.
Amazing.
In
Well, listen,
person.
on behalf of the transgender community, as I am a member of this community, I want to thank each and every one of you for watching this video, for learning, and for being an ally to our community, because you are the people that make a difference for us. So thank you. And because of people like you, many trans people are feeling the power to be able to stand up on their own 2 feet and say, I need to be counted. My voice matters. So thank you so much. It's with much, much gratitude that I give you my love for being here today.
Thank you. And use all these videos, spread them out there, spread them out there. Love you guys. Love you all. Nico, Raz.
Thank you.
Mahalo.